Hi all, this is Michael Guthman. I'm a program manager on the Dynamics CRM team, and today we'll be taking a look at configuring internet-facing deployment using Microsoft Dynamics CRM 2011. So before we actually get started doing a configuration of an IFD, let's take a step back and just talk about our different authentication pipelines and how they've changed from CRM 4.0 to CRM 2011. Now in CRM 4.0 we had two authentication pipelines. The first one being just Windows integrated authentication, very standard. It would be an internal only deployment, and you would authenticate through AD, and that was basically the extent of it. The other one was forms-based authentication, and so what this did is it allowed you to configure a deployment that was internet facing, so someone who was working at home could access their CRM deployment without needing to be basically VPN'd into their corporate network. And so when they attempted to access their CRM system, we would prompt them with a form. Then the user would enter their credentials, and then those credentials would be used to basically verify that they are who they say they are against Active Directory. And then after that, we would issue a CRM ticket, which would be assigned back to that user, and that CRM ticket would be used again and again to make sure that the request was authenticated. So it was pretty much, you could view it almost as a thin wrapper on Active Directory that we basically owned. And what we've done in CRM 2011 is we've basically discontinued the use of forms-based authentication in lieu of using claims-based authentication. So this is a standards compliant authentication mechanism, and our particular implementation is standards compliant as well. So we should work with pretty much any security token service on the market that is also standards compliant, but for the sake of this demo we'll be demonstrating using Active Directory Federation Services 2.0. And so with claims-based authentication you essentially have an identity provider, which is your security token service, and behind that security token service is a number of other identity providers which will basically could be anything like multiple Active Directory domains. And so your users could reside in those different Active Directory domains, and there doesn't need to be any sort of trust between them, and all of them can still access the same CRM deployment. And this is something that was not possible before in CRM 4.0. So in CRM 4. Or in CRM 2011, we now have, of course, the Windows integrated authentication deployment again as we had in CRM 4.0, and then we also have the ability to do internal claims-based authentication. So this is useful for doing things like you have multiple domains and your users are part of those domains and you don't have trust between them and you want them to all authenticate to CRM and access it. And then the third option would be to basically have external claims-based authentication. So this would be your internet-facing deployment. So it's possible then to have your user access the CRM deployment over the internet, just like they did before in CRM 4.0. So if you need more information on that, we encourage you to go check out more of our documentation on claims-based authentication and some of the different benefits that it offers. And then otherwise, we'll shift our focus to how do you actually configure an internet-facing deployment for CRM 2011 with claims-based authentication now. So what I've done here is I have a machine, and it has CRM 2011 already installed. In this case, I downloaded the server release candidate from the internet and already went ahead and installed that. And since I'm going to be deploying ADFS 2.0 on the same machine as my CRM server, what I did is I had a CRM server create a new website and use a different port than the default website, because ADFS 2.0 requires the use of the default website. So here you can see I have my deployment. It only has one org right now in the deployment, and it's on machine mguthman1588 :5555, which is the port that it's on, and this is organization 1, so org 1. Now the next thing I need to do in my deployment is I need to actually go through the process of configuring ADFS 2.0. So here is ADFS 2.0. I downloaded it from the internet, and I'm just going to go ahead and install it. Another thing to note is that actually before I get to this, I'm going to cancel out of this and talk a little bit about certificate management first. So one of the things that is necessary with ADFS 2.0 is of course you'll have to have certificates to do various things like encryption, and so what we recommend is using a wildcard certificate for this encryption. And the reason we encourage using the wildcard certificate is you can also use it for your SSL certificate, and if you use a wildcard certificate like say wildcard.contoso.com, all of your if you have multiple orgs in this deployment, all of those orgs will be satisfied with that wildcard. So it really supports multi-tenancy. Well, you'll only need one certificate, and it'll work for multiple requirements essentially. So that's what we recommend. In this case, I actually have a self-signed certificate. The self-signed certificate will work, but this is only for a test deployment. And so for any production deployment, we obviously strongly recommend that you use a purchased certificate from a certificate authority, and that's necessary for security reasons. So since this isn't since this is a self-signed certificate, the first thing that I'm going to do is actually put it in my Trusted Root Certification Authority store under the certificates local computer store, so that way it's trusted and we can use it as our encryption certificate in a minute. So I'll import that now. And that's been imported. You can see here's my certificate, and then I'll also put it within my personal store so that I can use it for my SSL certificate. So with that in place, what we'll do is we can actually go through the process of configuring ADFS 2.0. Here I'm installing it. We'll just be making a single federation server, and we'll let this run for a minute. I'll just pause it so we don't have to sit here and watch the progress bar. Okay, so my ADFS 2.0 has completed successfully, so I can go ahead and open the snap-in now that this is finished. And then what I'll do is I'll configure the federation server. Here I'll just be creating a new federation service. I don't have an existing federation service, and this will be a standalone server. And I'll just be using my wildcard certificate here since that'll satisfy the requirements appropriately, and I'll just call this STS1. Apparently I had ADFS pre-installed on this machine before, so we'll just delete that and hit next so that it can actually apply itself. And I'll pause the video again so we don't have to sit here and watch it. So ADFS configuration was successful, so I'll go ahead and click close, and the next thing that I'm going to do is actually go out to my host file and make some edits there. As part of configuring your internet-facing deployment, of course, you'll have to make some edits to your DNS. Since this is a test deployment, I will just be using the host file in Internet Explorer. And to edit that host file, I'll just need to go to Windows, System32, Drivers, etc., and then just edit this in Notepad. So in this case, I'll just be typing in my IP address for this machine. In this case, my IP is, let's see, 10.125.169.85. So I'll type that in. And I'll just type in the name of my security token service here. So in this case, it's sts1.contoso.com. So now that will resolve. And I'll save that and close it. Now, something I can do to just verify that that actually worked properly is I can open up Internet Explorer and verify that I can actually pull up our security token services federation metadata. So to do that, I'll just go to https:// sts1.contoso.com. In fact, in this case, I've already typed it in, and we can click hit enter, and sure enough, it's there and it looks appropriate. The next thing that we'll need to do is take the signing certificate that is in ADFS and export that. So I'll just click View Certificate, I'll copy it to a file, and then I can just hit Next, and in this case I will just call it Signing Cert and put it on my desktop. So now that that is done, what I'll do is I'll pull open my certificate's local computer, snap in again, and go to the Trusted Root Certification Authorities and import my certificate. The import was successful, and you can see my signing certificate is here. So some of the things that are just tricky with setting up ADFS 2.0 and setting up claims is just certificate management. So be sure that you have both your encryption certificate placed in the correct certificate stores and also the signing certificate. So now that this is in place, we just need to go through the process of actually preparing CRM for being configured with claims-based authentication. Now, claims-based authentication requires SSL on the website. So in our case, we are going to be configuring CRM as a relying party on this ADFS 2.0 security token service that we just set up, and that will be our identity provider. This relying party will need to use a binding that is HTTPS, so I'll add that. And I will use port 444 since ADFS is already using port 443, which is the default SSL binding. And I will use the wildcard certificate again. Now that that's done, I need to go to my CRM server in Deployment Manager, and I can edit the properties under web address and change it to HTTPS, so that way we indicate to CRM that we are using a different binding and a different binding type, and this needs to be specified within our deployment properties. In this case, it's HTTPS, and the port has changed to 444. So I'll just type that in for each of these values. And I can hit apply and OK. And so now CRM knows that it needs to be using that port instead. So we can actually navigate now to the CRM website, and it will be using HTTPS 444. Of course, the security certificate will not be trusted because of the fact that the wildcard certificate does not satisfy the machine name in this case, but that's okay because I'll only be configuring this particular deployment for an internet-facing deployment, so I'm not concerned about internal-only authentication. But we can continue to the site, and you can see that now our site is basically working over the SSL binding. So I'll close this window for now. And the next thing that we can do is go through the process of configuring claims-based authentication and IFD within CRM, and then we'll make our appropriate configuration changes in ADFS 2.0. So first I'll click Configure Claims-Based Authentication. I'll hit Next. In this case, I had already typed in my federation metadata URL from before, so that's why it pre-populated. And this is the certificate that I was using before. So everything passes its checks, and then we can go ahead and hit apply. Now, as you can see at this point, we actually have a federation metadata endpoint that we host within our CRM web application. We'll end up hosting two endpoints actually if you configure internet-facing deployment. There's going to be one configured for claims-based authentication, internal-only use, and then another one that's configured for external use for the internet-facing deployment. Again, since we will only be configuring, or since this deployment will only be used for internet-facing deployment, we only need to worry about the external authentication endpoint essentially, but both need to be configured, claims and IFD, because claims is a prerequisite for configuring IFD. So as you can see, the deployment manager now indicates that claims is enabled, and the next thing we need to do is configure the internet-facing deployment. So when you configure the internet-facing deployment, what you'll need to do is type in your external domain name that matches your certificate. So in this case, I called my certificate star.contoso.com. The port is going to be 444, so I'll need to type that in as well, as you can see here. And that will be basically the same for both the web app and the organization web service, unless you choose to separate those out for some reason. And the discovery web service domain will need to be a subdomain of the external domain that we're using. So that's why I chose to use dev.contoso.com. That's what we recommend you use. You can really specify whatever you want there, but you'll just need to be sure to put dev.contoso.com among other things in your host file or in your DNS. Then it auto-populates with auth.contoso.com. This also needs to be a subdomain, and so this is the basically the endpoint that will be hit for doing the authentication. So we'll hit next again because both those values will work. A few checks are performed, and we click next once more and apply. So now we're basically been configured for internet-facing deployment. So as part of configuring claims-based authentication, you have to essentially establish a two-way trust. In this case, first we established that CRM is a relying party of the security token service. So we've indicated that sts1.contoso.com is the federation service that we trust. And then now we'll have to go over to sts1.contoso.com, the federation service in this case, to trust the relying party, which is CRM. And another important thing to note too is I'll also need to change my host file to accommodate each of these basically endpoints that we'll be hitting. So since this is all on the same machine, it will be the same IP. And in this case, I'll have to expose auth.contoso.com and dev.contoso.com. And finally, for each organization in my deployment, I will need to add that to my DNS as well. In this case, I only have one organization, so it's just org1. But of course, if I had multiple, you could see how I would have org2, org3, etc. So now that that's done, I'll just click Save and close this. And then we just need to go through the process of taking ADFS 2.0 and configuring it appropriately. So the first thing that I need to do is actually go to my relying party trusts, which should populate, hopefully. One moment while I troubleshoot this. Oops, I clicked on relying party trusts. I meant claims provider trusts. And what we will need to do is add a new claims rule to this, because we'll basically need the UPN to be passed from Active Directory over to our relying party trust. So what I'm going to do first is click Edit Claims Rules. And then next I'm going to click Add a Rule. This will be an LDAP Attributes as Claims rule. And I'm going to call this one UPN. The attribute stores Active Directory. And then I will be selecting user principal name, and it'll be outgoing as simply UPN. And click Finish. Apply and OK. So that's done. So be sure that you add that claims rule on your claims provider trusts. Now next we need to create a relying party for CRM. Now like I mentioned before, since this will be only for an internet-facing deployment, I only need to create one relying party trust that utilizes that federation metadata XML endpoint that was created after we are during the process of running our IFD configuration wizard within the CRM deployment manager. If I wanted to have both internal and external claims, I would need to have two relying party trusts, one for the internal claims access and one for the external claims access. But like I said, in this case, we only need one. So I'll add a new relying party trust. We will use the auth endpoint that we set up a second ago, which was auth.contoso.com, and be sure to also specify the port if you're not using the default port. And then just basically complete the wizard. What we'll do is we'll check to verify that the appropriate identifiers are here, and they are. As you can see, these are all the identifiers that we added to our host file a moment ago. And then that's the extent of creating the new relying party trust. You can see it's right here. So now we need to add the claims rules for CRM to work with ADFS 2.0. So the first thing we'll do is add a rule that is a pass-through rule. And this one is going to be UPN. And we'll pass in UPN. So here I'll just be passing through the UPN, and we can click Finish. I'll need to add another one that's also a pass-through. And this one will be for the primary SID. Click Finish. And then the last rule that we need to add to our relying party trust will be actually a transform. So in this case, this is actually for the Windows account name. The incoming claim will be the Windows account name, and the outgoing claim will just simply be name. So now that ADFS is configured with the appropriate trusts and with the appropriate claims rules, and also that CRM has been configured the same way, we should have a working deployment. One thing I will do before we actually test it out is I'm going to do an IIS reset just to be sure that IIS picks up the new settings. And so at this point we should be able to open Internet Explorer and go to https://org1.contoso.com with our port, and we should be prompted with the STS login page. This will take a moment since it's the first time and it's also running on a VM, so thanks for your patience. And it looks like it's working, so this is a good sign. I'll type in my username. In this case, it's mguthman1588dom for my domain and administrator. And hopefully we should be able to sign in and see our web app in IFD mode. And it looks like we were successful. As you can see up here, our URL is org1.contoso.com, so this is of course the IFD address scheme as opposed to the internal address scheme, and we are accessing CRM via claims-based authentication, and this is an internet-facing deployment. So I hope this video was helpful for you, and we look to provide more information and documentation on claims-based authentication and internet-facing deployments for CRM 2011 soon. Thanks.